Well, like we've said before, we're doing the story. And the story is a great opportunity for us to read God's story from the beginning to the end. At some point in this story, you're going to find a connection, something that's just going to leap off of the pages to you, and you're like, wow, I can't believe that God wrote this about me. Or maybe that God, it feels like maybe He wrote it directly to you. And what you're going to find throughout the story is that it's really not about you. I mean, that's the big thing for me as I've grown in my relationship with God, is that at first I came to church and there was this thing that kind of told me that, God did all this for me. And sometimes as pastors we can really dilute God's story by making you think that God did everything for you. No, He did give everything for you, but it wasn't all about you. It was about Him having His purpose fulfilled through you. Does that make sense? There's a big, big difference. God wants to use you. He can use you. He will use you despite all of your mess, all of your flaws, all of your mistakes. God will, He can, and He is using you. Amen? Amen. A couple of years ago, our neighbors gave us a book. Actually, they gave the book to Isaiah. And it was a Batman book. Isaiah loves anything Batman, Star Wars, things like that. But it was kind of a complete the story yourself kind of a book. You read a page and then it says at the bottom you can turn to this page if you choose this decision, and if you choose a different decision then you turn to that page. Maybe you've seen a book like that before where you kind of fill in the blanks, complete your own story. So it was kind of neat. You could read the book several times over and get a different story. Yeah, they're doing that with TV now too. Any Hawaii 5-0 fans? Got some 5-0 fans? I get so annoyed over the last couple weeks with these commercials about choose your own ending. But at the same time, the idea of just being able to interact with and engage in the story kind of can take it to a whole nother level. It makes it more personal. And, many times we try to do that with our life. It's kind of like when we're young, we have these dreams, these visions about what we're going to do with life. Who we're going to marry, where we're going to live, what we're going to do for a job, what kind of car we're going to drive. All of these things, these ideas. And then reality happens, right? I mean, most of us, if not all of us, are not living the dreams that we had when we were a child. We're actually probably far from it. At some point in there, we realize that happily ever after doesn't happen within a matter of a storybook or a movie. That somewhere in there, life takes this huge turn and we're left dealing with all of the baggage. What do we do with the mess? And sometimes we make the wrong choices and that mess happens to us as a consequence. And sometimes people do it to us and we're left dealing with that. Joseph, he started his speech maybe this way. I have a dream. It's Martin Luther King Jr. weekend. We celebrate that observance on Monday. And perhaps the greatest dream or dreamer came from the book of Genesis and Joseph. And Joseph, as a young child, had a dream. He was the favorite of the children. How many of you are the youngest child in the family? Okay, I just want to speak for all the oldest children here. We hate you. You guys just get everything handed to you, generally speaking. While we're left there to pave the way, you think that your life was hard. I mean, try being the first. You're the first to stretch the boundaries. You're the first to kind of make it out on your own. Okay, maybe hate's a little bit bigger of a word than what we want to use here, but the concept is the same for the story of Joseph. Joseph was the youngest of the children. He was special. He was privileged. And his dad loved him. Now, his brothers could see that he was loved. And if it wasn't just enough that he showed favoritism, he had special clothing made for him. While everybody else was getting the thrift store hand-me-downs, Joseph was in the latest fashion. His special coat with many colors. Now that made his brothers even more upset. You know, it wasn't enough that he didn't get all these extra privileges, but now he's getting all the good clothing too. And then Joseph, in his ignorance, goes to his brothers and starts talking to them about his dream. You know, hey guys, I had this dream. You know, we were out, we were binding some sheaves of grain, and we were putting them all together, and then suddenly this sheaf pops up, and all bowing down to it. What he was saying to his brothers is, one day, you're going to be bowing down to me. His brothers didn't think that was such a good idea. Matter of fact, one time when they were out in the field, his dad sent Joseph to check up on his brothers, and his brothers saw him coming. And so they began to scheme on how they were going to take his life. And so they came up with this plan, and they were going to kill him, throw him into a well, and nobody would know what happened. But one of the brothers, Reuben, spoke up and he said, well, I don't think we need to go that far. He is our brother. He's our flesh and blood. Let's just throw him in the cistern. Because that's a lot better. I mean, nobody's going to find him and he'll die. But his plan was to maybe come back and pick him up out of the well later and take him back home. But then they saw the guys coming through on the trade route, going to Egypt, and they're like, you know what, hey, we're not going to get any money for him if we just leave him in the well. Let's sell him. He can be a slave. We'll ship him off. So they did that, and they took his clothes, and they ripped him up, and they dipped him in goat's blood, and they took him to Dad and said, you know, hey, Dad, something happened to your son, don't know what it was. They began to connive and dream up this whole process. Now, we probably would say that's taking it a little far. Matter of fact, I heard those comments this morning in Sunday school class. It's going a little far, don't you think? I mean, hey, look around. This is the world we live in. How many news stories do we see on a weekly basis about somebody being the victim of some hate crime? And it happens. And many times it happens because of somebody that was close to them, having some sort of grudge or vengeance. Something needing to be acted out upon. But we see that through this story, Joseph is not getting what he wanted. I mean, in his dream, it was, you guys are going to bow to me. I don't see anywhere in the pages of Scripture where Joseph says, you know what, guys, I had a dream. You're going to hate me and throw me in a well and then sell me to be a slave in some foreign country. That wasn't his dream at all. But how many of us, whenever we're handed that dream, we're just so excited about it. We have so much to look forward to, and then life happens, reality happens, the dream is just like squashed. Then somebody throws a wet blanket on any passionate fire that you have inside of you, and then you have to choose a path. And that path simply is this. How do I react to what has just happened to me? Because we can't choose everything about life. It's not a storybook. We can't look to the bottom of each page and go, okay, so now how does it end? But we can choose how we respond to certain things. And Joseph was sent away to Egypt. And there he was put into the house of Potiphar, an official in the Egyptian workforce there. And inside Potiphar's house, he basically rose the seniority ladder. He just climbed through that. He apparently had some amazing administrative gifts. He was probably a very hard worker. And so, entering into Egypt as a slave, he was the head of the slaves within the house. Matter of fact, Potiphar, his master, hardly did anything. It was Joseph who was running the house. And it says he was a well-built and handsome man. Eventually, Potiphar's wife took notice of him. Well, why wouldn't she? I mean, her husband was probably lazy, allowing Joseph to do everything. And now Joseph is doing it. He's being the man of the house, and he's attractive, and so she wants to be with him. Now, I don't know exactly how it played out other than this. It says Joseph, he didn't even want to be near her. You know, it's like she walks into the room and he walks out. Sometimes we need to be with that way in life. There are certain temptations, certain struggles, certain things in life that we just simply need to walk away from, and Joseph did that. But it says one day Joseph was in the house and was by himself, and none of the other servants were there. And Potiphar's wife made an advance on him. Hey, come to bed with me. And Joseph was left with another choice. What am I going to do? because this is not the way I drew it up. This is not the plan that I think God had for me in my life. Joseph's response is this. Even though she's got a hold of his cloak, his outer garment, he takes off anyway, leaves it behind, running out of the house. I think we can learn a lot from this. This story in particular, you can make a sermon series on. About fleeing from sin, fleeing from temptation, fleeing from sexual immorality. And by all means, our country today can use this message. We have a society that's very deep in sexual immorality. And we need to be able to learn that through Christ, we can experience freedom. Through Christ, we can have opportunities to flee and run away. We don't have to stay. We don't have to sit in it. We don't have to continue to dwell within the temptation. And Joseph was an upright guy. He very easily could have done this and probably could have hid it and maybe could have even become the master of the house there. But he chose to run away. Now, I don't know about you in your life, but for me in my life, it seems like sometimes I'm faced with a dilemma, a choice. And it's like I can do the right thing or I can do the wrong thing. And it's like everybody else is doing the wrong thing and they're having fun and they're getting away with it. I do the right thing and it just seems like things get worse. Has that ever happened to you? It's like, I want to do what's right and things just don't work out. Well, that's true for Joseph. He wanted to do what was right. He left the temptation. And then what happens? Potiphar's wife says, hey, that slave you got for me, he's trying to make an advance on me. Of course, Potiphar's not very happy with that. Throws Joseph into jail, into the prison. Joseph goes from being the chief of the kids, you know, he's the baby, but he's the best. That's his dream anyway. To then he's a slave in a foreign land, to now he's not just a slave, he's a prisoner. Life is definitely not going the way that Joseph had intended it to go. And maybe perhaps that's a little glimpse into your life. Maybe you had these big dreams and ambitions, things that you thought were going to work out. And you're like, yes, this is going to be awesome. This is going to be amazing. I'm going to go to this school and I'm going to get this job. And the guy that's going to come into my life is going to be like this. And it's just not. And you feel like, hey, I've made some good choices. What's happening? Well, Joseph probably had to wonder the same thing, even though we're not told of any doubt. Matter of fact, we're probably more likely to lean the opposite. Joseph, just like Abraham, was a man of faith. He continued to have faith in God, even though his situation was horrible. Even though he continued to be led down disappointing paths, to say the least. But Joseph was inside the jail, and there are a couple of the Pharaoh's officials, the cupbearer and the baker, and they have dreams. And Joseph is given this amazing gift. Not only does he have these wildly crazy dreams, he can interpret them too. And so the first guy is like, yeah, I had a dream. And Joseph interprets it. He's like, 3 days later, you're going to be restored. You're going to be back with the Pharaoh. It's going to be awesome. And the other guy's like, hey, punch my ticket too. Interpret my dream. I want to know what the future holds for me. And he says, well, yours is 3 days too. And you're going to lose your head. Not exactly the most positive interpretation of a dream. But indeed that happens. And as the cupbearer makes his way to Pharaoh, he is supposed to remember Joseph in the prison. Some time has passed. Joseph is in the prison, and he's climbing the ranks in prison. Just the same way he did in Potiphar's house. He's just climbing that ladder till he's second in command again, and only to the person who's in charge, the head jailer. How amazing is that? You can be in jail, and you can be in charge, you can be running the place. And that was Joseph. God continually looked on him with favor. You may not think that. I mean, he's a slave, he's a prisoner. But God is continually looking on him with favor. It says throughout the passages in Genesis that God was with him. The Lord was with Joseph. How amazing is it just to know that God is with you? Now that's even more amazing because we go back to the beginning of Genesis and remember that when God created the heavens and the earth and He created Adam and Eve, it says that He was with them in the garden. He was walking with them. And whenever Adam and Eve chose to sin, they separated themselves from God. And God's whole purpose is to passionately pursue us so that one day, again, He can be with us. He wants a relationship with us. But throughout this situation, what words continually arise? But the Lord was with Joseph. His favor was on him. And so Joseph is there in the prison, and the cupbearer is with Pharaoh. Pharaoh has a dream. He can't find anybody to interpret his dream. Sometimes I wish I just had somebody to interpret my dreams. I don't know how about you guys, but yeah, I don't remember a lot of them, but sometimes they jump out and I'm like, what in the world was that about? I just don't get it. And do all dreams have a meaning or not? I don't have an answer, just more questions. But there the Pharaoh is, he's stuck, and apparently this dream is just eating at him. He's like, what does this mean? Well, the cupbearer finally remembers, oh yeah, hey, there was this guy in jail, that time you sent me there. Hey, don't worry about it, but there was a guy, and he can come and he can interpret your dreams. So Joseph comes and interprets the dreams. Basically what he finds out is that there's going to be 7 fantastic years. They're going to be amazing. The harvest is going to be great. And then after that 7 years, where there's going to be a drought, it's going to be horrible. And so Joseph begins to not only interpret the dream, but use God's gift of wisdom to explain that what Pharaoh really needs to do is to stock up. He needs to begin to invest, because a day is coming when they'll need that food bank again. And so Pharaoh's like, hey, good point. We need somebody who's really wise, somebody who can manage this thing, get it off the ground. I pick you. So Joseph goes from being the youngest, the favorite, to being a slave, to being thrown in prison. And he doesn't even hit any rungs in between. It's like Chutes and Ladders. You hit the ladder and you go straight to the top. And there he is, second in command in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. Joseph, you ever have that happen to you where you're out shopping and you find that spot right up front and somebody says, oh, you must be living right. Joseph must have been living right. Things were clicking for him. You wouldn't think that because of all the road bumps in his life, all the disappointing situations in his life. He could have been angry. He could have just been vengeful. I got to be honest, if some of those things would have happened to me, I would not have taken them well. Probably still wouldn't take them near as well. Probably wouldn't make as good a choices as Joseph is continually making. But there he is, second command. He begins to initiate all of this stuff, and all of it's taking place under his watch. And then up in Canaan, near that promised land that Abram was bringing his ancestors to, they were experiencing drought. So here comes his brothers, and they come into his presence, and they're asking for food. Now they don't recognize him. He's probably dressed in the Egyptian garb, and he's probably matured quite a bit since that point in time when they were selling him into slavery. And he's speaking, obviously, in Egyptian. It says he's talking through an interpreter. They don't recognize who it is, but he sees them, and he knows exactly who they are. Now, how many of us, if we're honest, would say, if I had that kind of power, those guys would pay. I would hold that over them so bad. Well, he does toy with them a little bit. He begins to test them, and he runs them kind of through the ringer to the point where he can't do it any longer. He can't hold it in. His emotions just get the best of him, and he just lets go and he weeps in front of his brothers. Not a weeping that says, oh, you guys are horrible, I can't stand you, but a weeping that says, I've missed you so much. And they're like, this is before Moses, but holy cow, I didn't see this happening. That dream 20 years ago. My brothers are going to come in, they're going to bow before me. It took 20 years of life, 20 years of mess, before Joseph was able to experience this breakthrough, to be reunited with his family, to experience a whole different kind of relationship. I wonder Are you willing to persevere long enough through the mess to find God's glory? Do you see that there's light at the end of the tunnel? And Joseph had a completely different picture of life. Throughout the story, we've been talking about the lower story and the upper story. And on the lower story, it's that me-centric universe. It's all about what I see and what I can touch and what I can feel, what's tangible to me. And the world revolves around me. It's about what makes me happy. And it's about what other people did to me. And Joseph could have gotten caught up in that. He could have very easily become resentful and angry and bitter. But what did he do in response? He forgave his brothers. He welcomed them back. And not only did he welcome them back, I mean, he could have given them the guest room in the house, put them in the back corner, maybe even made them slaves, which would have been better than what they were experiencing at that point in time. At least they would have had food. But he gives them the best land in the area. He provides for all of their needs. He went above and beyond what should have been expected of somebody who had been betrayed by his own family. And I think the answer to that question is simply this. The answer to the question of why would he be so forgiving to people who had treated him so poorly is that Joseph saw the big picture. Remember last week I talked to you about a puzzle. We're left with this little piece. We're like, what does this mean? In our whole life we're pursuing, what does this mean? And we begin to connect with a few people around us and it begins to make sense. But until we step back and we see all the pieces put together, we miss God's big picture. We miss the story. And Joseph, somewhere in this, saw the big picture. Because he said to his brothers who were begging for mercy, don't worry. What you intended for harm, what you had intended for evil, God has used for good. God used all that stuff to make something great happen. God took this mess and made a masterpiece of it. You see, the family of Abraham, the Israelites, they wouldn't have probably been very well accepted in Egypt. Probably wouldn't have been cared for that much. But through Joseph being sold into slavery, this shepherd boy was able to rise the ladder of seniority to the point of being second in command. God was able to keep the Israelites from intermarrying with the Canaanites, which we're going to find out later, because the Israelites were supposed to annihilate them, to drive them completely out of the promised land. This was God's punishment on these people who were not living by faith. So God was able to use something that was horrible and create it good. Now, I want you to ask yourself, what has God used in my life that was a mess to begin to create in me a masterpiece? And so I had to ask the same question. My life is drastically different now than it was when I was a kid. Okay, the family life is completely different now than when I was a kid. My dreams and hopes and ambitions, I don't even know what they were. I mean, I was kind of all over the place. But I remember as a kid saying, if I get a job that just pays $20,000 a year, that'd be great. You remember those days whenever, that money just didn't make sense? And now it's like that's just a drop in the bucket in a lot of ways. Whenever you start paying for a mortgage and you pay for the insurance and you have kids, and I'm fortunate that we still have enough time to save up for college because that's coming too. But life just brings you so many curveballs. I thought that hey, I'm going to go to college and technical school. I'm going to be involved in auto body, and that's what my uncle was involved with. I found it interesting, and God had a different plan. Yeah, because I'm not an auto body technician. I probably couldn't take a dent out worth anything right now. There were other ambitions and hopes I had in life. Probably didn't ever think, I can be honest, I never thought I was going to live in Minnesota. Here I am. But how did I get to this point? I continue to look back on my life. And I think one of the greatest influences in my life to me becoming a Christian and to becoming a pastor is divorce. My parents divorced at a young age. Dad wasn't there. There were some other men who stepped in to fill that void in my life. The pastor at the local Assembly of God church, who was very active with youth, ran a program called Royal Rangers. Made an impact in my life. There was a man who was working in the youth ministry at Sheridan Christian Church who came by on a regular basis to see if we wanted a ride to get to church. He took me along to different functions. This man, when I didn't know what discipleship was, this man discipled me. He took me to another level. And I just wondered, would I have had that craving for God, for a spiritual father, had mine been there? Brokenness. I remember in high school, and I've shared this story before, getting so drunk and throwing up and getting caught in my sinful life, and that being a turning point in my life where I said, you know what, either I take this life seriously and I began to walk the road that Christ has made before me, or I turn away from it. I'm tired of living a lie. God can take your mess and make it a masterpiece. He did it for Joseph. He's done it for me. And He can do it for you. But guess what? It's for His glory. It's for His purpose. Are you ready to turn your life over to Him? Are you ready to find peace and comfort in knowing that it's not about you, it's about this big picture? Seeing God's upper story, a different perspective on life. God has great things in store for you. Romans in chapter 8 says this in verse 26. And we know that in all things God works to the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. God works together for your good if you love Him. You don't think He's just going to make it happen, that it's just magically going to appear, that everything is going to be for your glory. It's for those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. It all works out. What can separate us from the love of God? It's great things that happen there. So I need to tell you something else too. Regardless of what life is bringing you, divorce, job loss, death, illness, do you have faith? And if you have faith, then you believe this: God is with me. Will you say that with me? God is with me. Whatever you're facing, whatever struggles you've got, whatever your mess is, God is with you. Okay? And if God is for me, who can be against me? God is going to work for my good to accomplish His purpose in my life. His purpose in my life. Not my purpose in my life. Not my dreams, my hopes, my ambitions. His story. But I first have to surrender my life, my soul, to Him. Are we ready to surrender? Because God is going to do amazing things through you and through us when we surrender to Him.